Thanks for coming to our part 2 of recording techniques, getting you from your bedroom to preparing you for the studio. Tonight our guest speakers are Joey Gurwin, Grammy-nominated producer and owner of Oranjudio Studios, and Keith Hanlon, who's also the owner of Secret Studios, and his partner in his business, Amy Turn Sharp, who will be our moderator. I'm glad you guys are here, and I wanted to make a couple of announcements before I relinquish this microphone. One, we are having on December 19th our first annual Jingle Mingle. And our guest speaker for that event will be, besides the Christmas punch and free food, our speaker is going to be a gentleman named Angel Lopez. And if you're not familiar with the name, Angel Lopez is most likely the most successful songwriter and record producer that we've ever produced out of Columbus, a hometown guy whose family still lives here, and I will read you some of his credits. His probably highest profile credit right now is he's produced and co-written the Jack Harlow album, Coldplay, Timbaland, Justin Bieber, Justin Timberlake, Muse, Sam Smith, Mariah Carey, Maluma, who he won a Latin Grammy for, Missy Elliott, Chance the Rapper, and can I bite my tongue and say Kanye West? But anyway, he's really proud to be from Columbus. He's still down home and as humble as anyone I could imagine being. Another announcement, and you'll watch for our newsletter, that'll have all the information how to register. And if you're interested in attending this Wednesday, we're involved with the presentation of a proclamation from the City Council and the Mayor and the renaming of a street honoring Joe Walsh. And that'll take place in the northwest corner of Nationwide and Front, which will now be called Joe Walsh Way, at 1 o'clock. And I'd love to see a nice turnout for Joe. He's an extraordinary guy. Actually, he has a big thing happening. I think is it tomorrow at Used Kids? I think it's tomorrow, where he's actually going to sign old albums, Joe Walsh albums, Eagle albums, James Gang albums, sell merch for Vets Aid, and Greg Hall, who owns Used Kids, is going to match every dollar that they earn through the sale of merch, dollar for dollar. And it happens that Used Kids was Joe's local record store. He grew up a few blocks from there. So if you want to turn out and show him some props and some honors. I think that's it for announcements. Do I have anything else to say? Well, thanks again for being here. And now let me turn this all over to the queen of the studio scene, Amy Turn Sharp. Here she is. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Thank you so much. Can I come see Joe Walsh? Hi, guys. Welcome. Have you guys been here before? It's such a beautiful space. If you haven't taken a little tour, take a little tour around and look. Are you okay on there? Yeah. Okay. We've got an injured man down.
Keith is hurt too.
We had the pleasure of doing this at the Big Room Bar. When was that? A few months back, 5 months ago or so, probably. And we talked a lot about home recording and kind of like what you need to start off with. And we had excellent Q&A, lots of hot tips. That's what I'm known for, is pulling hot tips from people. So we will say that. We'll say it together now. 1, 2, 3. Hot tips. That's what people come here for. But I think the greatest thing is just to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about, yourself as a musician or a producer, engineer, and your studio.
Me? Oh, okay. My name's Keith Hanlon. I'm owner of Secret Studio along with Amy. I'm a musician, been playing drums most of my life. Also a adjunct professor at Ohio University teaching audio production work there.
My name's Joey Gurwin. I own and operate Oranjudio Recording in Grandview, Columbus, Ohio. I've also been playing music for, I don't know, for as long as I can remember. Also do a lot of sound design installation lately at the WEX. Recorded lots of artists, national, local. I'm also an adjunct professor with Keith at Ohio University. Also teaching audio production and mixing techniques. And I'm just happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you. Can I get a hand? How many of you have recorded at home? Oh, you were so hot. Everyone is doing it. Okay. How many of you have recorded in a studio? And how many of you want to continue to record in studios, but it's expensive or whatever? Okay. Yeah, everyone. Okay, it's so great. Everyone is here together. Everyone look at each other. You're all beautiful. Okay. So what we're going to learn about tonight, I think, am I right, is that we're going to talk about, first of all, how to like kind of venture out of your bedroom or your, closet or whatever. And what it kind of takes, what are the barriers? Sometimes people are scared to go into a studio because it's expensive or they're not sure. So maybe we're going to do like a little primer tonight of like how to go to the studio. And even if you've been there before, maybe we'll learn a little bit more about how to do it.
There'll be some hot tips.
Hot tips. So, okay. So I guess my first question, I don't know where my glasses are. I don't know. Okay, we're going to try this. What information should you send to an engineer or studio that you're interested in recording with? Like, what's your first contact? Like, what happens? And either of you can start, but both of you can answer.
I just like to get some background information on what your goals are, what style of music you're performing and recording, and from there, when I say what your goals are, like, okay, we're going to record, 4 songs, or I'm working on an album, or I just need to do vocals for stuff I did at home, things like that. So that kind of gives me an idea of how much time we're going to spend in the studio and things like that. And that's super helpful for us, but it also allows me to kind of talk to you a little bit about and ask you questions about, how you want the session to work and how you want to get things finished, in what form and all sorts of little questions. It's just a good starting point in that respects. As far as that first contact, sometimes, I just get a question like, do you have next Tuesday available? Something like that. But I feel like a nice introductory email and maybe even some links are super helpful, not as to whether I want to work with you or not, but which I would love to work with you. It gives me more of an idea of what you're about before I make contact and we start talking. So that's kind of my answer to that introductory question.
I'm first going to say how not to contact your studio or producer. And the answer to that question is do not call the studio ever and say, do you have some time tonight? Like, don't do that. That's like, it's the bane of my existence. I don't know about your guys' business model, but I'm not like a pizza shop where you just like kind of like walk in. Like, do you take walk-ins? I'm not sitting around at the studio waiting on your phone call for you to come in and, do vocals for the song that you just thought up today. So I'd say the first point of contact is knowing that we do this a lot with a bunch of different artists, all the time. So chances are, if I'm at the studio, it's because I'm working with another artist. And so I guess my first hot tip would be... Hot tip. My first hot tip is to not call the studio thinking that you're going to get a walk-in appointment. There are some studios where you can do that, but usually not the best idea. I I think that the information that I like to get from somebody who's contacting the studio is, their expectations, their timeline, what style of music they're working with, where their what their goals are, where they're wanting this stuff to live. Is this a song that you're just doing for, I don't know, an Instagram ad or a video, or is this a full album? Is this a short EP? Are we just tracking drums for you to take the files home so you can mess with them at home? So I think that I like to, and like Keith said, there's a whole bunch of questions that I ask that seem almost irrelevant, but they're often important for me to figure out what your goals are, where you're trying to be. And honestly, if you have links, those are always great for me, because I want to, I do want to know, hey, is this something that I'm even best for? Because I'm not the best for every single record that calls me. And so I might be like, hey, like Keith might be the dude to call for this. Or even if it's somebody within my staff at Oranjudio. That happened just the other week, where I was like full on, and then we had like a pre-production meeting, which is normally like the first thing that I like to schedule. And I was like, this is an Eric project. I don't even know why I'm in here. And I called Eric, who was sort of, he's my assistant, who was sort of, cut for a project like this. And I think that the more you can communicate about what your project is and what you want what the goals are of that project, I think the more information that we have, the better opportunity that we have to help you make the best record that you can. And I want you guys to have the best record that you can, even if that means me not working on your record. Even if that means, like, I want everybody to have an awesome record.
Awesome. No, I think that's true. I've heard a lot of talk like, well, I don't really do this kind of style, or, or so-and-so does more, what's it called, with the tapes? Analog. I own a recording studio. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so it's cool that you can, like, in the community at least, and your staff know who's best for who. Because it's important. You don't want to be doing something that you don't like either.
Yeah, I think that that's probably something that is really cool about the recording community in Columbus. Most of the studio owners all kind of know each other, and we all know who's really good at what, and so it's just it's a great business to be in, where you can, I'm sure that any other business that operated that way, that they're like, hey, you just sent that guy to your competition. You're like, ah, well,
No, I was pleasantly surprised to find that out. It's very cool. Well, Columbus is a great music city, and it's just like our art. Our musicians are collaborative, and they want to be together and learn from each other. So, okay. So we're getting out of the house. Like, say, my name's Charlie. And I have like a whole bunch of demos, and I'm coming to you. We've had a meeting or whatever, but like, what happens like next? Like, if I'm like coming to you guys and I have some demos, like how do I start? And I've been making them under my bed, on my iPhone. Under your bed? I don't know, like whatever, yeah.
Demos are super helpful, and especially now with the technology we have with computers and GarageBand and everything, it's like super easy to save things that you've done at home and bring them into the studio with you to continue working on them there. But it really, it all depends on how you want to approach your project. I do a lot of rock and roll bands, and I do a lot of live jazz groups, and I've done quite a bit of everything from, gospel music to string, old-timey string bands and things like that. But, what I do the most of is something where you have a band coming into the studio and they want to play together live, like they play in the rehearsal space or when they play live in concert. And so a lot of what I do in my style of working is usually kind of giving them that environment to create and to perform. And so demos for me of the things that you bring in from home is super helpful, because it gives me an instant, I'll know what the vibe of the song is. I'll know, I know certain things can go in different directions. Oh, this might remain an acoustic song. This might turn into a whole band song or something. But it allows for more discussion and communication on your music, and that's super helpful.
Yeah, I love demos, and for a number of reasons. A, because like Keith said, it definitely helps with planning out how your session is going to go. It also helps me plan on what I need. Very often on sessions that I'm in, I'll have the band or I'll have the artist, and then there's also a whole bunch of session musicians that I'm hiring, or extra production that is not done, in the in their normal course of doing business. And so that might mean that I am hiring somebody to do some horn arrangements, or I'm fiddling around with string arrangements that are going to go underneath this song. And so yeah, very often, very early on, I'm like, hey, can I get your demos? If the changes are weird, can I get some chord sheets so I can see what's going on here? I like to sit with the band, kind of listen to the demos, make any suggestions that I might have on arrangement changes. Hey, I think that this bridge should be twice as long, or I think that this, solo section that you have in the demo should be half as long. I think that this should be an acoustic song. I think that this should just be a piano song. I think that this song should slow down. I think that this song should speed up. It just kind of is the first opportunity to kind of get those creative juices flowing with the people that are coming in the studio. And aside from their own demos, one thing that I really like to ask artists is if you could name 5 records that you would really want your record to sound like. And then I can listen to their demos and then listen to their reference material or the stuff that has inspired them. And it just, especially the week before a session, if I'm listening to that in the car on the way back from Athens or whatever, and it can just get me in that aesthetic headspace for what that artist is wanting to achieve.
So go ahead, sorry. Well, no, I'm going to go ahead actually. So is it kind of like a relationship? It's like a new relationship when you start to record with a new producer engineer or whatever. Like it's, sure. Okay, so.
Yeah, and it is not what we do is a very, it is a very technical thing, but we aren't just technicians, and we are part of this, creative process with you, and we are not instilling our creative process on somebody, and somebody is, kind of not coming into the studio and just kind of taking over. There's a point where we meet, because there's there are the things that I can do creatively, there are the things that Keith can do creatively, and then there's the things that the artist does creatively. And yeah, it's just about building a relationship that especially for records, we're going to be spending a lot of time together, and so kind of getting those wheels greased up on, what it's like to kind of collaborate with this, with these people is a really, really important thing to get started.
I was just going to ask you, Joey, and I think every engineer will answer, or even studio owner in Columbus might answer this differently, is where do you see yourself as far as being an engineer versus being a producer engineer? There are expectations that some might have of you that maybe you're like, that's not what I do.
Yeah, that's not my scope. So yeah, especially more and more, and I think as the producer engineer hat and the lines that are between, producer and engineer have become more and more blurred as budgets have gotten smaller, and we're expected to both be technicians and engineer, and also produce and give our own creative input into what's happening. I think that for me personally, most of the people that I find myself working with now, I think that they are wanting a lot of production stuff, and it isn't necessarily, it's not like full on Quincy Jones. I'm like writing your tunes for you. But there is a lot of like, hey, like this need, we've hit a wall. We know that, this song needs something. Like, what does it, there's a lot of asking for my input on a lot of these sessions, and sometimes the answer is less. Sometimes it's just like, you guys are just throwing too much at this. You just need to. Do I have a question?
Yeah.
So early before, yeah.
You're allowed.
I was gonna ask this later, but since you're kind of on the subject now,
Uh-huh.
How do you handle like artists that have like their own producer, like some knucklehead with a copy of Cubase who thinks he knows how to do your job better than you do? That sounds really specific. It's because I work with a guy like that.
It is specific, but not unique. I normally let people know, like, hey man, like you hired me, and this is what I do for a living. This is what I do all day, every day. If you think that you can do it better, then like maybe we should have a fourth recording technique of, from the studio to the bedroom. And we will invite just those people where I'm like, hey man, like if like there's a reason why why you called me. And if you're not wanting to utilize, my skill set, my expertise, then like that's cool. I'm sure I need a nap anyway. I think that the most important, like this is so based on relationships, and I think that once an artist or a client or whatever sees that we are just as invested in this record being awesome as you are, then then it's like, oh man, same team. And once people realize like I'm working to, I'm working with you guys in order to us to achieve the shared goal of making a kick-ass record, and then.
We're gonna. Oh, you have more? You can say more. Sorry. Hot tip.
No, not necessarily. I was just going to talk a little bit with my experience as a musician when I was younger and going to the studio for the first time. And I was super excited, and I was like, oh yeah, I took all my tempos too fast, and just, it was like I was young. And then when I started actually doing studio work as an engineer, I soon realized not everyone feels that way when they come into a studio. And some people are really nervous. Some people don't know a thing about recording at all, which is fine. That's why I'm here. But it's okay. If you should work with somebody you're comfortable with, I guess is my point. And if somebody is not making you feel good about what you're doing in the studio, you should probably not go to them. And I've talked to people in the past, like, you make this really easy, and it was really hard because this person who was recording this did all this stuff and wasn't listening and blah blah blah. And I just think, yeah, we want a certain result of a record, but I also want you to be happy. I want you to feel good about what you're doing, and maybe this is a learning situation so that your next record will be even better.
Yeah.
So I'm just very adamant that like you should just work with somebody that you're comfortable working with.
Yeah, I think Keith, like one thing that Keith just said that reminded, well, he made me recall my first time in the studio and like what my experience is and how that informs kind of what I do now. And also, you said just listening. And I think how, so my first time in the studio, I have this distinct memory of also being like super pumped and being in the studio and also a little nervous and doing this take that was just terrible. It was terrible. And I just heard from the talkback, okay, cool, like we'll move on to the next one. And I remember thinking like, no, we're not cool. We're not, no, did you hear that? That was terrible. We're not doing that. Like we are cutting that again. And this realization that that dude was he was a technician. He was just kind of like, he was hitting record, if nobody else in the room said retake it, he wasn't going to say retake it. And when I started being paid to record people, I had that dude in the back of my mind, and I was like, I am not going to be that guy. I'm going to let people know in a loving way, very that I know for a fact that they have a better one in them. If I know for a fact that they have a better one in them, and most of the time I do know for a fact if they have a better one in them. And that I was going to help them get to where they wanted to be, and that just getting into the studio wasn't, I think for a lot of people, just getting into the studio is sort of like, it becomes like this big thing, like, oh, take pictures of ourselves in the studio, we're in the studio, we're in the studio. And once they're in the studio, I really want them to, get the results that they're wanting. And I never want to be that dude who's not listening or thinks so, like that's just being a technician, that's just pushing buttons, because I can just push buttons, anywhere.
I just actually randomly had an experience of being an engineer last week. I'm not an engineer. I am a writer and a poet. But our friend and coworker, Lydia Lovelace, was making, she was making a piece for her Patreon page. So she was singing in Italian, super cool. And I was like, I was Control RN, I was in there doing it because Keith wasn't there. And I was like, I will do it. I don't know anything. I know a little bit of Reaper. That's all I know. I don't know anything else. But she did it a couple times, and I know her really well. So I have a really close relationship with her. I am not in music. I'm not an engineer. But I remember being really confident in saying, do it again. Do it again so you have something else to play with. Do it again. And she was like, that's what a good engineer does, is they let you, because I could hear her nervousness, or I could hear hesitation, and like, that must, and also I'm in the studio enough with a lot of people to see like that magic happen, and that's what that relationship is. And I keep it is really all relationship based. It is. So let's see. People want to know things like, how much is like a studio average? How much does it cost? People want to know that. They want to know. They want to know. Yo, if I want to go in there for a whole day.
This is like such a
It's on average.
well, so because the question is always asked like, how much per song?
Yes, that's on here too.
I know. I saw it. And so people are like, hey, how much? Like, I want to make a record. How much does that cost? And the answer is, well, it depends. And it depends on a whole bunch of stuff. Are you trying to live in the studio for 2 weeks? Are we hiring? A bunch of session musicians? Are we getting, Carlos Santana to a guest? The answer is between $1 and $1 million. Right. And so I think that what's important is to have that initial meeting and find out like what the scope of the project is. Any other industry, you're gonna find out like what you're agreeing to and what the scope of the project is. When I was really young, I made the mistake of being like, oh, I'll do your record for so many dollars, and then like 3 months later I'm still working on that record, and I'm like, man, I'm pretty sure that I'm paying to produce this record for these people at this point. And And so, yeah, the answer, it depends. But I think that, kind of, what to expect is that the time that you're in the studio, you're going to be paying, depending on the studio here in Columbus, you're going to be paying, between $40 and $75 an hour. Assuming it's a music project. If it's a commercial project, it's going to cost significantly more than that. And so your time in the studio is probably going to be based on a fixed hourly rate. Anything, anything that you're asking somebody like me or Keith to do after you leave the studio should not be assumed that it's free.
Is that post-production?
Yeah, that is called that is also our job. So, I I very much will get the well, okay, we were at the studio for 4 hours, and you'll have the song mixed by the end of the day, and you can send it to us, and we'll just pay for 4 hours of time. And you're like, no, dude, that's not how this goes. So I think that in that pre-production meeting, it's important to communicate really openly what your budget for the project is, like, so you don't go over budget and I don't push you over budget, and that I figure out a way to work your project into into what your projected budget is going to be. Because projects kind of change over time, and it's important to have those communications early, because it's always easier to have them early than to have them, at the end.
Yeah, I think it's like, yeah, well, I think it's great. I think it's also about like, knowing like, you really get tired after a few hours, like knowing like what their schedules are, and I think stamina is a big thing in recording, and knowing your own stamina.
Yeah, I get a lot. Okay, we've rehearsed all our songs. We're gonna book a 10-hour day. We're gonna come in. We're gonna do all the basic tracks, and then the next day we're gonna come in and do vocals and some guitar solos, and probably, the drummer will probably want a tambourine part on half the songs, and so hour 6, everyone is just shot.
Yeah, they went to Five Guys thinking that it was gonna like rejuvenate them, and everybody's just taking naps.
Or they went to land grant.
Or just the pizza came in, yeah, and taking naps. So, I've found in that pre-production conversation and that pre-studio conversation, discussing that has really helped. I've been like, well, I know you want to come in do 10 hours, and because I give you a break if you want to come in for a long day on that, just, usually. But, that's not a whole lot. It's not a huge break. You'd be better off just coming in for 5 hours today and 5 hours tomorrow. And, we just kind of make it so that we don't have to worry about like setting things back up and setting, and just, you'll do better work. I'll do better work. And, I think it just benefits the project overall.
Yeah, I actually, to that point, I stopped when people like book day rates, I stopped telling people that this is a time, because I don't want to incentivize somebody like pushing past their limit, because usually what happens is if a band is able to work for 8 hours and they push to, they're like, oh, well, we got to get to 10 hours, or we got to get to 12 hours, because then we get a 50, you're going to push to a 12-hour day, so you can get a 50% or I'm sorry, a $50, savings in the studio, but you're going to end up throwing away 3 hours of recorded material. And so and I guess that's another hot tip, is that sometimes what looks to be more expensive on the front end actually saves you a ton of money on the back end. Because if you have your drummer drumming on hour 11 of a day, and you just know that you're going to have to book a whole nother day for this drummer to come in and redo all these tracks because he's exhausted, or you're going to pay me for another 2 days to edit these drums so they sound passable, you're just going to end up spending more money on the back end because you thought that you could save money by pushing to that block threshold where and also be kind of familiar with the recording process. I think that is why recording at home can be really, really helpful. There's this joke that goes around, and like there's like some studio owners like meme group or whatever, and some I'll definitely invite you. And yeah, people like call and they're like, how much per hour? And you're like, oh, I don't know, I'm $65 an hour. And they're like, okay, well, my song's only 10 minutes long.
yeah.
So, and you're like, no, that's
It's
not.
crazy, y'all.
And then this one guy posted, his response to that question was like, they're like, oh, well, if you're $100 an hour, my song's only, 6 minutes long, so it should be $10 or whatever. And he's like, well, don't you want to listen to it once when you're done? And so yeah, just like knowing how the recording process works, and that your 5-minute song is going to, take hours and hours and hours to make happen. You don't just go and, it's not "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," where you just go in and sing into his cam and he gives you $10.
Okay, well, I think we have another question at the end, maybe if we have time, but I'd really like to open it up to you guys because I think that you're here and you have maybe some questions that we could talk about. You can just shout out or you can come down and use the
Sup,
mic.
Tobin?
If I'm starting a project and I have in my mind, I want something, for instance, I want it to have a T-Bone Burnett feel. How do you interview engineer/producers in town to find that? What's the process for finding what I want? Because people don't market themselves as, this is my specialty, this is what I do, I'm more acoustic, It's, at least the studio's in Columbus, so there's a lot of studios. How do you know where to go for what you're trying to achieve?
I just would suggest, talking to everybody, have those conversations with each studio just to see where they're coming from. And like we were talking about reference material, a T-Bone Burnett production, so this is the kind of things where we're looking for doing, to do. I feel like I've had those conversations so many times with different people, prior to even booking a session or not booking a session. But I never mind talking to somebody and giving them a studio tour and talking about your project and just seeing if it's going to work.
It's a fair question to ask pretty much anybody.
I would think so.
Oh,
yeah.
for sure. And I would go, you're looking for like, I can't speak for everybody, but I think that you're looking for the right fit and we're also looking for the right fit. And so if you're going to talk to Keith, just like Keith is going to ask you for reference material on what you want your record to sound like, I would also like it if you listen to, I'm not going to be mad if you listen to records that I've done and you're like, oh man, I really like what you did on, on such and such a record, or just doing your diligence on your end, like if you know that you want to sound like X, and that you're like, well, these seem to be just hip hop studios, so I'm not going to go to just the hip hop studios or whatever, and listening to the work of the producers and engineers and asking, in that pre-production meeting or the pre-production meeting, hey, have you done any stuff like this? How would you tackle stuff that you wanted to sound like this? Is there anything that you could listen to, that I could listen to, that would at least ballpark that aesthetic for me? And I think that's a completely reasonable thing. That.
So if I approached you, does it ever happen that you would say, Jeff, I'm not a T-Bone Burnett guy, but Keith is. Give him a call. I know he's done stuff like that. Does that happen within your community?
Yes, absolutely.
You'll reference each other out.
Oh yeah, for sure. I've gotten, since I started doing like that analog Africa stuff, I feel like anytime anybody gets anything that sounds just like it's from anywhere outside of the country, it'll get forwarded to me. And they're like, oh, that sounds like an African record. I'll bet Joey could do that. And it'll just like come to me. And I'm like, guys, I'm not, you know.
Stop giving me so much work.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but we definitely do that. I actually just think that it was just a couple of months ago that I had a guy call Keith because he was wanting me to remix some stuff from some old tapes of his, and I was like, Keith is the dude for this, you know.
Old tape, dude.
It was some old rock and roll tape stuff, and Keith definitely was the dude. So
I'll just give you an example too, though. I just did a studio tour with a band that I had worked with at another studio that I used to do work at, and but they'd never been to Secret Studio before, and we discussed, you know, what they wanted versus what they got last time, and I sent over, especially the drummer, she wanted like a certain drum sound, and so I just went through everything I had done at Secret Studio since we opened, find like the best examples of that to send that over, saying here's one we did with all the room mics, here's one we did that was more close mic, here's one we did put all the drums in the ISO booth, and here's the different sounds that we got for the drum set, and you know, it just was super helpful in that respect, as far as like being able to communicate through music, you know, and just, this is what I've done. But also I put like, you know, I started to do it just because I was starting and I was kind of like trying to build a resume, but my website has, every time an album or some release comes out that I've worked on, I'll list it on my website. And now that's more, instead of just trying to like build a reputation for me, now it's kind of like, this is the stuff I've done. If you've heard it, you may like that. That might be what you're looking for. Some good examples of things that I've done, you know. So by all means, you know, check out our websites. If I don't know if everyone keeps them up to date, but I try to.
You have a good archive.
I have an archive.
do my best.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question. You talked a lot about, thanks for coming out and doing this, by the way, it's really helpful, so appreciate it. Talked a lot about the creative part of the studio. I'm kind of curious on the business side, like how and when does like the split sheet part come in, like for the projects that you're on, or like where do you make the determination, like, hey, I should be getting more of a writing credit here, versus a producing credit, that type of stuff? You can speak to that, that'd be great.
I think you would be a good
Yeah,
person to speak to that, because he's probably done more writing and arranging and things than I have.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Again, that is from a simple business practice. That is also something that's going to be needed to be discussed in the pre-production meeting. You know, especially. So in any other business, you know, or in any other side of this business, if I'm not working with an artist, if you're, I don't know, Express Brands, and you're asking me to produce a song for you, the first question that I'm going to ask is this a work for hire, or am I licensing this song, you know, to you? And the price, you know, your invoice is going to reflect whether this is a work for hire or if this is intellectual property that I am retaining that I'm licensing to you. And so that if that is going to be part of the scope of the project, you know, writing, arranging, or even in some cases, if it's a project where their budget does not allow for all the things that they, you know, that they want to get done, but I really, for whatever reason, really believe in this record, really want to make this stuff happen. And I'm like, listen, you know, I will take a reduced rate based on your budget in exchange for, you know, writer shares on the split sheets. That's usually something that we're discussing really, really early on in the conversation. Um, I like to talk about money one time and one time only. And, because it has this really, really gross way of just sullying the creative process. I want to have the currency talk one time and then hopefully, we can, you'll get an invoice or whatever, or we'll sign the split sheets at the end of the session and that's all done. But sometimes if we have agreed that I'm going to get writer's shares or this many points on the record, and that the number of points have not been defined super early on, and there's I feel like I actually wrote 14.5% of the song or whatever. I've dealt with that just sort of one time where I was like, hey guys, it felt like I did a lot more heavy lifting than I thought that I was going to do. And they were like, yes, yes, you did. And we just, did not on our BMI split sheets. But that's usually a conversation that I want to have really, really early on. You had a question?
So, if you have your music that you want to bring, just say you made your own beats, your own vocals, whatever, and come to you like, okay, this is our catalog. How would you go and tear down the song, or would you use our WAV file to rebuild it up? You know what I mean? To recreate, or just add to, take away? How does that work?
So that depends entirely on the project, I've had, especially this being the, from home to the, to the studio, I've gotten a lot of stuff where somebody just brings me, the stems that they produced in Ableton or Fruity Loops or, whatever at home. And I'm just, I'm initially just working with those stems. What I'll actually do is I'm going to give you, a real assessment of what I think the song, what needs to be changed, what needs to be re-recorded, if there's anything re-recorded, or if there needs to be anything added. And so I'll take your original samples and I'll be like, hey, what do you think about there being, some strings in an arpeggiator right here, just to, liven this thing up a little bit. How do you feel about me doing a beat drop here? It wasn't in your original arrangement, but I think that it, really, really helps the song. I almost always, in those cases, will have people come in and re-record vocals. Just because vocals that were recorded in, on a Yeti mic and, in your, spare bedroom might not hold up really well when I start, putting it through some sort of processing. And so, yeah, we'll just decide what here stays, what here goes, what gets replaced, what gets augmented, and then, yeah, mix your song.
Let's say you make your own music and you want to distribute it like throughout major platforms, make money off of it. How would you go through that process?
You just released a record, so.
Yeah. So that's a huge question, and there's a lot of different ways to that, but I think the easiest is that there are companies like DistroKid, the Orchard,
Yeah, TuneCore.
TuneCore, where you can pay to have your music distributed digitally, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. Bandcamp is bandcamp.com. It's a great distribution site and where you get a little more money from your streams, or not really your streams, or your sales, and you could sell merch on that website. But it's hard. It's really, really hard. And especially the music that I've been doing myself is, more experimental ambient music. But I've even talked to people in a variety of genres. There's so much content right now. Everyone's making music, and it's really hard to grab people's attention. It takes a lot of contacts. It takes a lot of publicity, and it ends up costing a lot. But I'm not one to say don't go for it. It's just that you will open up this Pandora's box of like, oh wow, there's so much to do. To do, you could do it on your own if you have the time to do it, but if you're working like full-time job, trying to be creative and doing all these things, it's quite an undertaking, and that's why things like Columbus Music Commission and stuff like GCAC grants and things like that are really helpful for us here in Columbus to try to push beyond what we were able to do without those resources. But I don't know if you have any other things to add to that.
Yeah, I think that as far as just getting them on the platforms, there's a half a dozen ways of just getting your stuff out. Usually, the challenge after leaving the studio is not the getting it out; it's getting it out and listened to by who you want it to be listened to. And yeah, unfortunately, just because of how we created a system that no longer had gatekeepers, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh man, I wish we had gatekeepers again. Just because there's just so much, it's like trying to go to the horseshoe on and differentiate like a single voice when there's 110,000 people yelling at the same time. And so, but that should not stop anybody from putting their stuff out there, because one way of guaranteeing that nobody hears it is to not put it out,
What about like TikTok? Should we put their music on TikTok? I don't know. My teenager says.
And don't tell my 13-year-old girl that I said this, because I curse TikTok up and down at my house. But yes, put it like, but yeah, it's a great vehicle. You're not going to get paid on TikTok. Like I actually did. I actually just, I think it was last year, did this song, and its entire promotional, like I didn't understand it. Like managers were like, the entire promo is like based on this TikTok dance that that we paid these these people, and they're gonna put out a TikTok dance, and this is gonna be the sound that they use. It didn't make any sense to me at the time, but sure as shit, the song blew up. So so yes, like any creative thing that you can do to get people listening to your stuff, do it. Like if it means, and that doesn't just mean whatever. We all do we know Adrian Justanis, who, I don't know, might be. So Adrian, who lived here in Columbus for a long time, he just plays violin on the street in New Orleans, and he's gone viral like 1,000,000 times over, and has made has had more, had a more viable career made from just people making him go viral and him just playing on a street corner on Frenchman Street than he ever would have had, recording his violin at the studio and releasing it on Spotify. So get creative.
Yeah, I think that another thing is about the studio, though. Studios here in Columbus is we're just really lucky. It's a very creative city, and any of the studios that are awesome, like you guys is in Columbus, they're not only going to have like one person there that's the owner, and they're going to have a band of characters, their friends, their poets, their all the artists that are going to be there. Often marketing help, like you're going to be able to get in with it's like having a small family to support you. So think about open up your eyes to all the other things that are around you at a studio too, and the people that come there, and who you can learn from. For sure. Any other questions? Okay, well, we're going to do one hot tip each then. It can be anything you want. It can be, there was one question I didn't go over about what if you're into engineering and you've been doing that at home and you want to get experience or get hired. What are some tips?
That's a really, really good. I actually just was talking to the students at OU about this. So I was recording at my house, before, before Oranjudio and before Oranjudio 1. And I think that I had a misconception on what it meant to get a job at a studio. I thought that, hey, I can do this stuff. This studio should hire me. I'm going to go to Keith and say, hey, Keith, I know how to do these things. You should hire me to do them at your studio. And then Keith's response is, yeah, I know how to do those things too. I do them at my studio for a living. And so, and I had that conversation, I don't even know how many times, like, hey, you should hire me. And they're like, yeah, I'm sure you're really good. Bye. And then I realized that the value that I could bring to a studio was not the fact that I knew how to, edit in Pro Tools, or that I knew how, the signal flow on a console. Was that I could build relationships with artists, because as a business owner, putting on my business owner hat for a second, like a new engineer, really, that, I'm just like, oh, that's scary. That's a person that I'm going to be paying that I don't know that is going to do stuff to my standard, whatever. But when somebody comes in and they're like, man, I have all these clients, I don't know what to do with them. I see that, like, you're only open till 10 o'clock at night because you're 40 whatever years old and you like to sleep at night. What if I take all my clients and I bring them and I work here from midnight to 7 a.m. I just be your midnight madness guy. Like, if you're wanting to get a job at the studio, your value to the company, is not your skills, because there's a whole bunch of people that know, what preamps sound cool. And there's a whole bunch of people that know how to, run, Melodyne. But not everybody has the skill set of, like, I have all these relationships and, like, I already have records to make. Like, I'm not asking you to give me work. I'm saying I have work and I need a place to do it. And that is, like, the number one tip that I'd say to somebody trying to work in a studio is know what value you actually bring to a company. And when rents are getting paid, the value is billings.
That's great. That's a good thing. I'm thinking about that recently too. We've been thinking about that, bringing on people in our studio. So, can I ask you for a hot tip? Oh, sorry, a hot tip from you. Just going back to, like, getting prepared to go to the studio.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing I wanted to just bring up in general was the nature of computers in our music recording world now. There are so many DAWs that you could be using. They are not compatible with each other necessarily. A Windows formatted hard drive may be readable but not writable on a Mac. A Mac hard drive will not work on formatted for Mac will not work on a Windows machine. So it's a huge issue. So, we have Pro Tools, we have Reaper, we have Logic, but we can't have everything. We can't continually, at our studios, pay for licenses on software that just sit there, and also finding the time to learn how to use them all, because they're all so different. So really, it's if you're moving from the bedroom to the studio, moving those files with you can be really difficult, especially if it's in GarageBand. It's really difficult to get it into another program. So that's something that may require a little more time in the studio. Maybe bring your laptop in and we just trying to figure it out, and how we can get these tracks and your stems or your tracks to our system so that we can start working on things together. So don't forget about that, because I've had many sessions just stall out because of incompatibilities. So
Any other questions?
So Logic is one of the ones, Logic or Pro Tools?
Pro Tools and Logic, I think are, I mean, at OU, that's kind of what we're using in the university environment, and that's what most studios are using.
Yeah, it's what I'm primarily working with. I think I also have I have a copy of Ableton just because people, sometimes they'll need to use Ableton sessions. But yeah, primarily
I use Reaper because,
it's easy.
well, it's not the man. It's not corporations.
Well, thank you very much for listening. And if you didn't get a chance to ask a question or you're shy, you can come down and ask them right now. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you to the Music Columbus.